So we live in a society today where with a basic internet connection and a microprocessor, you can teach yourself anything online. And this idea of teaching yourself something on your own is a passion of mine, and it's actually called autodidacticism. But today I want to demonstrate that it's not just learning to program or code that's become available and easy, but actually the art of entrepreneurship itself has begun to transcend, traditional age and geographical constraints that there once were. So you can be, a teenager in your bedroom in any part of the world and actually create a company or idea. And so the way I want to demonstrate that is through talking you through what happened to me, as David was kind of saying, over the last few years, the story of Sumly, and then kind of what I'm working on today and where I hope to be in the future. So I started programming in 2008, just when the App Store had been announced. I'd been inspired by what I'd seen at the Apple keynotes. You could stream them online. So I streamed one of the original iPhone announcements and was really excited by this idea of an iPhone application, but I had had no programming experience. And so I went online and figured out that you need to know this programming language called C, because Objective-C, which is the native language for iPhone coding, was predicated on that. And so I bought a book, C for Dummies. I was 12 at the time, but all this stuff was available online. And so I was able to teach myself a bit of this programming and then do my first iPhone application in the summer of 2008. And it was, I'd admit, pretty dumb. It was called Finger Mill, and it was a treadmill for your fingers. So, it's like literally just like one screen and you do this with your fingers. But it was exciting because the first day I launched that, I had 79 pounds worth of sales. And that, the tangibility of that was pretty remarkable. Like my parents were like, wow, is this real money? Is this fake? Is this virtual? Whatever. But it kind of gave me a taste for what was available now and accessible because of the internet. And so I spent a few years from the age of 12 to 15 just kind of on the side, in summer holidays or whatever, just trying to play with these apps and experiences just to learn and self-indulge. And then actually when I was 15, about 2 years ago, I kind of after revising for my summer exams at high school, I just realized that there was a bit of an inefficiency when it came to consuming information when you're on a phone, because right now, because of small screen real estates, there's not much room on the screen, and so it's hard to go through lots of text. You don't want to have a convoluted experience. And so to date, all of the previews for web pages that have been done in search engines or social networks had literally just been taking a photo or kind of a PNG of the screen and showing it as you hover over a result or something. And I thought we can get a lot more literal in the preview. We should actually give a snapshot of the content and produce a summary of some sort, a textual summary. And so I actually looked into this field of natural language processing, and it turned out that there'd been some automatic text summarization done in the 1960s, and there'd been some classical approaches to this, but no one had tried to take those fundamentals and replicate it for the kind of this new paradigm of phones and information. And so for a few months, I kind of read about this, tried to program a little algorithm for this, and released this application called Trimit. And what happened with Trimit is, I'd been doing apps for a few years, and Apple had never really paid attention. There's thousands of apps still in the store, but I was fortunate enough that this application actually got featured by Apple as a new and noteworthy app, which is, is amazing. One of my kind of happiest days of my life, literally, was to see Apple recognize it and put it in the top 12 apps of the week. Like, just every week they have this list. And off the back of that, a few articles were written about it, and I got this email from this investor in Hong Kong. So Li Ka-shing, he's the eighth wealthiest man in the world, kind of oil media kind of conglomerate, in charge of a conglomerate, and his kind of team who do tech investments just reached out to me thinking this was a proper London-based AI and summarization company. Literally, like in the email, they kind of referenced that, and it obviously wasn't. But I actually decided to do the call a few weeks later during the summer holidays and pretend as though this was, like, kind of see how far I could take that. So I had a really high, I still do, I had a really high voice at the time back then. And so on the phone, so there's about an hour course. I did, I was trying to drop every bit of jargon and like whatever I could do, right? And then at the end of the call, I kind of thought I may as well fess up to this, because if this is going to go anywhere, then I'll be honest right now. And so I kind of explained my situation, just said I was really interested in doing something. And they flew out to London to make sure it was legitimate. And they were kind of excited because I'd been so young and I'd only grown up with the internet that there might be a chance that there was something here. And so they invested $300,000 seed money in September of 2011. And I took that money and went back to school, but on the side of school was basically during lessons and stuff, emailing people and trying to get a product out there. And so I spent 2 months working with a few contractors using that money. and in December 2011, launched the first version, like a beta version of Sumly. And the idea was to basically take any web page, be able to copy and paste it into the application, and then from that, quickly on the client side, produce a summary, kind of like 3 or 4 salient points. So basically a paragraph in length of text and information. I was fortunate that this application got featured by Apple as App of the Week. We had about 200,000 downloads. And I was able to take that initial, obviously just, I think, interest in the idea, and then through that, and through a bit of the press, media, and everything else, begin to start trying to hire a team. And so the first person who kind of came on to join the company and make it like a legitimate business was this person called Bart Swanson, who'd been the kind of COO at Baidu and had just left. And he started advising me informally, and then more formally, and then became the chairman of the company, and basically taught me how to take some of the ideas I had and really kind of bring them to fruition in a business sense. And so one of the first things we did is we began working with the Stanford Research Institute, or SRI, in kind of early 2012. And I was fortunate that the Li Ka-shing investors had invested in Siri, which obviously was very successful, sold to Apple, and that had spawned out of SRI initially. And so SRI were kind of interested in this idea of summarization, taking these kind of, the guy called Edmondson, kind of, he had this paradigm where you could take an article, kind of break it down, segment it into all of its sentences, and then give each sentence a score, like a salient score, and then pick the top n-ranked sentences, right? And so they wanted to take this idea, but then find a new way of spinning that into something for a phone. And we began working with them on the algorithm because one of the things I realized, it would be hard to persuade people to come work for me, like, because I was young and I didn't know, I hadn't gone to uni or a degree or anything yet. And so working with SRI was great because I had access to all of those resources, information, and knowledge, and I could kind of come up with a contractual agreement that worked. And so we spent about 9 months kind of working on the algorithm. And the interesting, I think, insight we had was that we realized if this was going to be an end product as opposed to something experimental, we needed to have high precision in the system. And the problem is with a lot of these automated technologies is you get low recall, like 1 in 10 times it won't work. But if it's that 1 in 10 times, suddenly the user lacks, doesn't have trust in the product. And therefore you can't get long-term user engagement because there's no reliability. So we tried to do everything we could to prevent low-quality summaries in the system. And the way we did that is we came up with this idea of a summarizability test. So before we tried to summarize algorithmically any of these documents that came in the system, we actually tried to determine whether or not it could be summarizable, like would our algorithm be able to produce high-quality content. And so we did that through working with journalists, through coming up with a big training set of a lot of kind of well-done summaries that came from articles. And it was experimental, so it had never really been done before. We kind of put it together into this iPhone application. And we wanted to not only kind of develop the technology side of things, but also on the iPhone application end. News was obviously a big vertical, and it could benefit from having kind of some summarization. And so I decided to build a news application around this summarization principle. And so we again worked from a design standpoint to try and make the product as intuitive as possible, but also differentiate it because, as you'll hear today, the news category is really competitive, and so you have to find your own spin or way of getting users to come back to your site or application every day. And so our spin was kind of salient, immediate information, but then also to package it up in kind of a really interesting mobile format, be mobile only, and to have really beautiful design. And so in November 1st, which actually happened to be my 17th birthday last year, we put this application on the App Store. And I was pretty surprised, actually, kind of what happened. We had about 150,000 downloads in the first 7 days. And Apple kind of featured us as their App of the Week editorially across the world because they liked the fact that, well, 2 things. First off, we were iOS only, so there was no Android. But also, I think, because kind of in the news category, there'd been a lot of traditional aggregators, which their focus was personalization. We can give you the personalized news and information. But there'd been very few that tried to actually go a step beyond that, almost like a meta level, and adjust the content itself and try and manipulate the content so it was really relevant and easy to access on a phone. And so that's what we were trying to do at Sumly. It was like go a step beyond and actually try and summarize it. So we were fortunate enough to be featured by them as one of the apps of the week. And then kind of over the course of its lifespan, so over the 5 or 6 months that it was available on the store, we had near 1 million downloads, and we actually won a design award from Apple for one of the most intuitive, for intuitive touch, so one of the top 5 apps for kind of user interaction design at the end of 2012. And so I was then considering, what do I want to do with the company? I really believe in this medium of summarization and having these kind of short summaries of content. And I wanted to continue to build a company, but I was kind of constrained with being in London, my age, inexperience, how was I going to continue to try and balance this with school and everything else? And so after the launch, I did go to Silicon Valley quite a few times. We started speaking to a lot of the investors. As David mentioned, we had a few of these angel investors. So we'd only raised, by this point, end of last year, $1.5 million from like 20 angel investors, so who were all very helpful and kind of were able to offer me advice and stuff. But we hadn't done kind of a big Series A round. And so as I began talking to a lot of these investors, I realized, I would probably have to move to Silicon Valley if I wanted to do this properly, or I wanted to continue to work with SRI, but it was hard to kind of be traveling back and forth. And I thought, what's the easiest way or the best way for me to take this idea and really try and bring it to the masses, or find a way of, not having to worry about resources or time, but just being able to focus on the creative output and trying to build this application and product. And so I was fortunate enough to be approached by a few companies in the Valley, and we started talking to them, and kind of my criterion for evaluating them was, what was the objective of the acquisition? Like what would come of it? Would it be one of these acquisitions where the product's shut down and you don't ever get to do anything? And, or would it be something where the company actually acknowledged the value in the technology and wanted to continue to throw R&D at it and see what could come of it? And also the people, like the environment. Did I feel at home there? Did I feel like I could get mentored and be able to learn? And because I'm still so young, I want to learn a lot from that kind of corporate environment. And fortunately enough, Yahoo got in touch, and I'd met Marissa briefly, but that was when she was at Google. And so I went into Yahoo and kind of almost immediately realized how exciting that place is right now. I mean, really it is. If you kind of go to Silicon Valley, you go there, it's like the epicenter of innovation right now. I mean, we have so many exciting products coming out the door. And it was clear even before the acquisition that there'd be a real home for Sumly there and the summarization technology. Because obviously Yahoo's content play right now is the idea of personalization and giving you, the news ordered for you. And I think a layer beyond that is the summarization level. It's like, not only are we going to give you kind of news in a beautiful, engaging way that's relevant, but then also we're going to make it kind of optimized for the device you're reading it on. And so for a few months, we began talking to Yahoo, and then earlier this year, in kind of March of this year, it was actually announced that we'd been acquired by Yahoo. And it's really interesting because I didn't know what to expect. I mean, it technically is my kind of first actual job, and I was a bit nervous going into the whole thing. Everything is quite serious. It is serious when you get acquired by a company. I didn't quite know what to anticipate, but kind of I spent the initial 2 weeks on site, and it was pretty remarkable because within the first 2 weeks, so the deal closed. It was announced. It closed like a week later, and then the initial first 2 weeks from it closing. We worked like night and day to actually integrate the technology into the production servers, so that 2 weeks after the acquisition was announced, we'd already had the Sumly technology running on the Yahoo servers on the stack, and it had actually been launched into the Yahoo kind of current home news application on iPhone and Android, which I'm told is kind of like for an acquisition kind of integration, a pretty awesome thing. And so I think it was exciting to kind of go through that process. And then also see the way Yahoo's structured internally. I mean, it feels to me anyway as though there are lots of small startups. And so despite now me being a Yahoo employee and working there, I still feel like I have creative control on the product and the ideas that are coming from that, because Yahoo now is going towards a mobile-first or mobile-only strategy. And as a result, you kind of have these pods within the mobile team. So you have a pod that looks after one application, a pod that looks after news, mail, etc. So I'm able to continue to do what I was doing at Sumly, now at Yahoo. And some of the paradigms that are exciting me right now relate to this idea of immediacy. People just want information as quickly as possible, and I think are becoming more and more impatient when it comes to consuming it. Sumly is one example of this medium, the idea of reading a long length piece of information. I'm not going to actually be able to ingest that content quick enough. Give me the summary, give me the salient points. If I like those salient points, I will then move on to the full length content and read in depth. And I think similarly, there's a lot of other products and services like Twitter, for example, that are trying to do this, where constrain the amount of information, the entropy that you have in the content, allow the person to read that, and then go further. And that's kind of really exciting to me, because I think, especially for a younger generation that literally does interact with mobile first, or mobile only to a sense, this is becoming an expectation. If you are given something that's going to take more than 2 minutes of your time, there's actually a lot of friction there, and it's almost like it kind of tails off. Like the longer that you expect someone to engage with your content, then the shorter or the likelihood is of their engagement. And so that's really interesting. And if you kind of track that trend further, kind of, again, with information mediums, this idea of kind of transiency that's coming through now with services like Snapchat and Vine, where it's like short, concise bits of information that actually then disappear at a certain point. And if you think about a feed anyway, once the item has been in the feed, unless there's some curation where at the end of the day or something the highlights of content are shown, it's disappeared forever. And so there's almost like an expendability in information where it's like once you've read or consumed that, it's gone. It's all about being in the moment, being live, being able to access that information and then done. And so that's really interesting to me to kind of look at that trend and shift and think about how we can use that with Sumly. So yeah, it's been a really exciting kind of 6 months now at Yahoo, and a year and a half at doing this stuff. And I'd like to just finish with really just saying, although I think there's a lot of awareness for learning to program and code and kind of bringing that into the education system, I think it also needs to be there that entrepreneurship is now a potential profession for someone. I mean, I went to a traditional school in the UK, and that wasn't one of the things they said you could do. And so I think it's really exciting now to see a lot of young people who will be at the Next Gen event actually on Saturday who are doing this and are involved in entrepreneurship. So thank you.
Nick. Just want to ask you a quick question. So on Saturday, you are one of our speakers here. We're doing an event to inspire 12 to 18-year-olds called Wired Next Generation. What is your message going to be in a sentence? What are you going to tell those teenagers?
Anything's possible, and I actually think you're at an advantage if you're young right now in this industry. So it's really exciting, and there'll be a lot more companies, I think, started by young people.
He's going to inspire quite a lot of people. Thank you very much, Nick.